Simonetta Carr, it's such a pleasure to have you on the Modern Puritan Podcast. Well, just here at the RHB studio as it is. I'm honored because we, as you know, we spent some of the day together yesterday as you were making your way up and down north, south, east, west, all around Grand Rapids to these different events to celebrate the award-winning church history that Reformation Heritage Books published. So for those watching, there it is. This is a fantastic accomplishment. I know that we here at RHB were debating for a while how to title it. Would it be Church History for Young Readers? Would it be just, some other title that dealt with church history? And I'm glad that we settled on just church history, because this really is a book for everyone. And I think you were just telling me about the artist who does your other books.
Yes.
So you've done numerous biographies, Christian biographies of Christians throughout church history that are beautifully illustrated. And tell me that again about the artist himself, in the canvases that he uses. What were you saying about those?
Yeah, those are oil paintings. So he uses canvases and he just paints.
Yeah. So for all of your books, for every single illustration, not including church history, because I know there's a lot of...
those are different, yeah.
Those are images that are maybe public domain or from elsewhere. But but for your series, the biographies, those are all oil paintings.
Yes.
Original oil paintings.
Original.
Amazing. Who's the artist?
Matt Abraxas.
Matt Abraxas. Okay. And what does he do with those with the original oil paintings on canvas?
Well, for a while he was trying to sell them, but he didn't succeed. So I think he's erasing them. So if anybody wants them, they should order them.
They should.
Really fast.
They should. Maybe there has just been a lack of awareness of the fact that they are out there. Okay.
Yeah.
How do you find him?
Well,
Does he have an online store?
He did. I'm going to check again and see if it's still on.
Let's find out about that. Okay, so you are originally from Italy.
Yes.
I've interviewed you before, but it was through Zoom, which is horrible.
Right.
And we've done a small character bio of you through an exceptional filmmaker, Lucas, in San Diego. And there you talked a bit about your upbringing in Italy, but just for the sake of probably a new audience, if you could revisit some of that upbringing. I remember there were some key points. You were raised Roman Catholic. Your parents had books in every room, including the bathroom.
Good memory.
So you are, I believe, our most prolific or published author at RHB.
After Dr. Beakey.
Exactly, yeah. So after Dr. Beakey. But it seems as though your upbringing had some part to play in that.
Probably.
Yeah. In your destiny to become a writer.
My destiny.
Do you recall any moments in your childhood when maybe the light turned on for you in terms of writing? So not just reading. It sounds like reading was just a part of growing up in your household. But when was it that writing itself as a creative act just...
Always.
Really?
I was always writing. And I would write stories, all kinds of stuff. And I think I threw away a lot. There was a period in my life when I was like downsizing and not giving importance to certain things. I think I threw away a bunch of my childhood writings. But
oh, no.
yeah, I was writing stories, lots of stuff.
Uh-huh.
And poems. I wrote different poems, especially when I was a teenager. Then I wrote more poems than stories. And I loved poetry. To me was like words were my means of expression. You know, like if you're an artist, you use your paintbrush and colors, and I'm pretty bad artist. I like art. I love art, but I don't think I'm a great artist. But I would sit on the subway and look at people in front of me and then write a poem about them. Perfect strangers, but just by observing, try to have a portrait of the person through poetry. It was just a way to pass time, I guess. but it intrigued me to be able to see how much I could express with a few words. In poetry, you can do that. So I liked that when I was a teenager. And then my mother, she is a published author, but she only wrote a few books and not very popular. Hardly anybody knows them, even in Italy. But she did write. She was a teacher. And this keeps falling off.
Yeah, go ahead and adjust. It's fine. Sorry.
My head is not made for this. So anyway, she was a writer and a teacher. And so she saw that I liked to write, and she was helping me. But the way she taught me, anybody today would say, it's wrong. Don't ever do this. She would dictate my essays. If I had an essay to do at home, she would say, okay, sit at the kitchen table, and she would be cooking, and she'd dictate my essay. And everybody would say, don't do that. What are you doing? You're doing your kids' homework. But I learned. And many times in Italian schools, we had to write essays in school.
Yeah.
And I knew what to do, and I would try to imitate what I had learned at home. So it was probably the wrong method, but it worked. So.
Well, it worked for you. So that's interesting. So I would think you would learn things such as sentence structure.
And character development, what to look for in a book, if it was a review, like what to look for. And because my mother was amazing for those things. She wrote really well.
Organization of your thinking.
That's right, yeah.
Let's go back to the poetry. Were most of your poems about people?
People or myself, feelings. I was a teenager, so lots to say about feelings.
Well, poetry is an amazing outlet for, being a teenager, but just being human in general.
Right.
Yeah, I started writing poems probably when I was a teenager, but not really knowing what I was doing. And then songwriting and poetry became a big part of my, daily existence, really. I wrote lots and lots of poems starting at university, and then was learning guitar at about the same time, so I started putting them to music.
Oh, good. Yeah.
But I'm intrigued by this idea or this picture in my head of young Simonetta sitting there on the subway looking at the person across from her and not using stencils or charcoal to make an image like my daughter would, but words. I guess it's safer, right? If you're on a subway, people can look over your shoulder and they're watching you make a picture. It's very interesting. But if you're just writing words, like,
they don't know
cares?
what I'm doing. Yeah.
And so you don't have any of those
I
portraits
think I
remaining?
have. I think I have some of the poems. Yeah.
Have you thought about publishing them?
No,
No?
I haven't thought about it. But
Do you still compose poetry?
no, not really. I stopped after a while, but I probably could pick it up, but
Yeah. It does take situations like that. So I, when we were living in London, or of course, whenever I travel to any large metropolitan area, I always have a camera, and I love doing street photography and just capturing moments of people doing things without you knowing.
right.
Like capturing real life, authenticity. It's much harder to do that when you don't have subways and busy sidewalks, and
That's right.
yeah, it's harder, isn't it? Yeah. So I imagine San Diego has opportunities for people watching and observation, but not quite the same as where you grew up in
Milan.
Milan. That's right. I was going to say Milan. Yeah. Do you go back to visit Milan much?
I went back last year. I don't go very often, but last year I had an opportunity to go. So.
Yeah. Of all the characters who you've written about from church history, how many of them are intimately connected to the place where you grew up? So Italy.
Peter Martyr Vermigli.
Yeah.
In the series, it was just Peter Martyr Vermigli and Giulia Gonzaga in that one series. In the book, Questions Women Asked, I had Giulia Gonzaga and I had Olympia Morata, Renee of France. She was of France, but she lived in Italy. Marcella, if you go back to ancient Rome, then Marcella.
Yeah.
I forgot who else. I think that's it for that.
I ask you that question because it was very, very important for me to do further studies abroad in the UK, because before I entered seminary, I had been reading the history of the Reformation. I'm forgetting the author's name now, but there was so much in there about the history of the Reformation in England. Sorry, and to actually walk those same areas, I think it was the same experience for me when I visited Israel and in Jerusalem. So I'm wondering if for you there was any sense of connection or a feeling of, this is history and it happened a long time ago, but these were real people that walked this ground.
Right.
They were here. And it's harder to say that about a place like San Diego,
Yes.
where you're from now,
Yeah.
or Los Angeles, where I'm from. There are historical figures that lived there and did amazing things. But when we're talking specifically about church history, which is your area of expertise, I mean, we look through this book of yours, for example, and I mean, not much of it happened in the United States.
True.
And not much of the ancient history or even, recent history. It would have to be very, very recent history that we saw that. So anyway, that's why I asked that question. It really brought all of that home to me, seeing the halls that say Latimer walked, or being in Geneva and going to the places where Calvin must have strolled by the lake and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Do those sorts of things inform your writing about these historical figures?
Yeah. That's why I put pictures and besides the illustrations, I put photos of places so that kids can understand this really happened. It was in this place, the place is still there, and kind of gives an idea of the reality of things.
Right. So instead of just having them, there we go. Instead of just, there's a map of the continent of Europe. But so instead of just relying upon their imagination, they can see, I'll show you here for people watching, pictures of castles, of battles. Did you Now, did you source all or most of these images yourself during the writing?
I found them. Yeah, that's
Really?
what you mean. I had to contact people and or agencies, or some are public domain, but some are not. So I would contact the photographers.
Okay. And were most people fairly
Yes.
receptive?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's interesting because for most of your books that you've published with us, the artwork is done by someone else.
Yes.
And here it seems like you did most of the, if not all, the sourcing.
Yeah.
What was that like, being the one also involved in constructing the visual aspect of the book?
Well, I've been doing that for all my biographies, all the photos. I provide all the photos.
Okay.
So it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And especially because I want good photos and photos that actually do represent something. And it does help me, because when I choose photos, it takes a lot of time. I just go and look at different photos of one place. Then I have to contact the photographers. Some don't respond, so I have to wait for one that says yes. But as I do it, I almost take a trip there, even if I'm not there, but I imagine it to go there, and I see all these places, and it does help me in my writing. So that's already a help.
Yeah.
But even with the illustrations, I work with the illustrator.
Yeah.
And that's why it's always difficult to find a good illustrator that can work with an author. Some publishers don't do that. They say, no, the authors should stay out of the picture. We deal with the illustrator, because authors can be a pain. They can. I don't know if I am. But
Is that a confession, or
I don't
are you
know.
talking about other people?
You have to ask Matt. But he's really patient, and we've been working together well.
Yeah.
He's patient with me, and we come up with ideas together.
It seems like that collaboration is really important to the success of that series.
Yes.
We were just at a Christian school here in Grand Rapids yesterday, and I remember as we walked into the lobby, off to the left through the glass walls was the library, and there on the shelves was, I think, the full series of your biographies just sitting there. And they hadn't put them out because you were coming. They were just there. I thought, oh, amazing. There it is. Because I've seen them here in the warehouse, but to see them out in the real world.
Yeah, in the
I
real
know.
world.
Well, just being someone who works at RHB, I made sure to get the full set for our kids. And my wife reads them to the girls in the evenings. Yeah, I think they're on Martin Luther now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Martin Luther was done by a different artist, because Matt took a break once.
Okay.
And so I had three different artists.
I'm going to move this mic closer to you.
Oh,
You're fine.
okay,
You're
I'm
fine.
sorry.
No, you're good.
I think I am moving.
You're fine. Yeah.
Yeah, we had three different artists during that time. And one is the same artist who did the illustrations for the, Brian, oh my goodness, now my brain. Jacques Brian, the series with the mouse. Oh my goodness.
I don't remember.
Jack something is the author. Starts with a B.
And who's the mouse character?
I can't remember right now. And it's Redwall. And my kids love those books, so I don't even know why that thought went into the recesses of my mind. Augustine writes about that, by the way.
The recesses of the mind.
About memory things that seem to disappear from your memory. So I should be a philosopher. So anyway, the Red Wall series. He did the Red Wall series.
Okay.
And I was so surprised that he said yes to illustrate Luther. And another one was done by an author who got cancer while he was doing the work. So he actually died right after finishing.
Oh, wow.
So that was very sad. That was Peter Martin Remilli. And then the first two were done by other artists. So it took me a while before I found Matt, and then after Matt took a break. But Matt has been the main one.
Yeah.
And it's really good because I think I've been working well with the other artists too. There was one that didn't, and I'm not going to say the name, but that I think I offended him by criticizing one of his pictures, but I'm used to with Matt. I tell him if I don't think the picture would be okay. But this one was in the very beginning, and he tore up all his sketches. And when I told somebody, they said, well, at least he didn't cut off his ear.
Yeah.
So, like
Van Gogh.
Van Gogh, yeah.
How did you find Matt in the first place?
That was so funny because I had a couple before, and as I said before, it was okay, but not completely okay before Matt. It was a little harder. I was just starting, and I was trying to find a good artist. And then I was talking to my pastor. He said, my brother is an artist. So now you tell me. And so that's his brother.
Oh, Matt is your pastor's brother.
My ex-pastor, yes.
Okay. So is Matt also located in San Diego?
No, he's in Colorado.
Okay. So when you talk about collaboration, this is not
Online,
in person.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And how many books is your series up to now? How many characters have you profiled?
21? Okay. Somebody knows.
Abby knows. So 21 people. And are there any more on the horizon?
Yes, they don't want me to stop, so I don't know. People will have to buy new shelves.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's one coming out now. It's Wang Mingdao, Chinese. I was able to put an African and a Chinese, so I'm really happy about that.
Yeah.
And then after that, I have Anne Bradstreet, so a poetess. And so that's done, and it's with the editor. And then I'm doing Macrina of Cappadocia, and because nobody knows her, I might say Macrina and the Cappadocian brothers, or Cappadocian something.
Yeah.
They were all three brothers, but yeah, maybe something like that.
I'm curious to know how, because you're covering so many different characters from church history, including very early ones like Irenaeus or Augustine, and then, of course, reformers like Luther, and then, like you just said, people from a more global perspective, and and I would say probably less well known. And how do you strike that balance between what is truth and what is legend, in a way that still keeps it compelling for young readers? Because it would be easy to make more legendary accounts, to focus on things that are maybe seemingly more exciting, if not completely true, because you think, well, we got to keep the kids entertained. But from what I've seen of your books, they stick to their actual history. They stick to the facts, and yet they're still compelling for young readers. How do you approach your writing in a way that keeps that young reader in mind, but also holds that tension of like, well, I want it to be true and right?
Well, I think the facts are exciting in themselves. So I try to stick just to the facts. There might be times when I mention, some people say this, and I bring up something that might be fun to learn, but that we don't necessarily know if it's true. But it's rare. I think in the ones I've written, the truth has been exciting enough. So I didn't need to bring anything in. But what I do sometimes, and that's when the illustrations also help, because sometimes I read their stories and I see that they, I notice something that they do. And then I say, oh, this would make a good illustrations. And then I realize that could be a fun point in the story to bring up and to highlight, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I do those things.
I imagine that you have to go through. And feel free to drink your tea. Or
Yeah.
coughing's okay on this show.
Okay.
I do it too. I imagine that there's a fair amount of culling that needs to happen, of circumstances that happened in a person's life. Some more than others, I'm sure. I'm sure we have more information about certain people than others. And what is kind of your criteria for what gets included and what gets excluded? Because they are thin volumes, and you can't write everything. It's not an exhaustive history of someone's life. So how do you make those decisions?
I think that's one of the most challenging part of my work, but I like challenges, so that's okay. Because it depends. Like, for example, I wrote about Irenaeus. We hardly know anything about Irenaeus. Macrina is about the same. So Irenaeus, we only knew he was born sometimes. Don't even know when. He went to France sometimes. And he wrote against the Gnostics. And he died. Other things are not really sure. He may have gone to Rome. He may have been sent to Rome with a letter. He made this, he made that. So, but I wanted to write about him because what he wrote about the Gnostics is so important. And we have Gnostics all over right now. So I said, I'm going to do it. And it was not easy. And in those cases, I kind of bring in other people. I brought Polycarp because Irenaeus learned from Polycarp. So I said something about Polycarp and other things that were going on at that time to make, or in this case, things that I read in the against the Gnostics, that he wrote. If you spoke about a certain situation, then I would explain what that situation was.
Right.
So
that was a way to kind of fill out missing details, even though you didn't have many biographical details of Irenaeus. There were things that were circumstantial to his life and people. I imagine it would be quite difficult to write a single book on Polycarp or other characters.
Yeah,
not characters, but people from church history.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of who you've covered, it seems as though in the Reformed tradition, and I have to be careful what I say here, but it seems that in the Reformed tradition we have, unlike the Reformers, somewhat neglected the church fathers, capital C, capital F church fathers, whereas other church traditions have embraced them, perhaps more than they should in some instances. But are there certain church fathers or characters around that critical period from between Irenaeus and, let's say, Luther, whom you think have been somewhat neglected, but perhaps you would like to write on?
Well, I wrote about Anselm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Irenaeus, Athanasius, Augustine are already there. Macrina is coming. And then I have Anselm from the Middle Ages. I think I'm going to do John Huss.
Do you have Athanasius?
I have Athanasius.
You did, right? Yeah, I remember seeing Athanasius. Justin Martyr?
No.
Not yet. I said yet. Not yet.
Yeah, we'll see. But
or Chrysostom? Have you done Chrysostom?
No. I think, I could. I would like to do more from the Middle Ages because I only have Anselm, and I'm going to do John Huss, but he's very close to the period of the Reformation, so
yeah,
Middle Ages would be good.
Yeah,
to do a couple more people.
I imagine there's so much, and I'm not an expert in church fathers or the Middle Ages by any means, but I imagine there's so much to be unearthed there.
Oh, yeah.
That, again, I said it earlier, but men like Calvin and Luther and who was the other one I was going to say? But the Reformers knew them intimately, and we probably would be wise to know them more than we do.
Yeah. And this is something, I don't know if this is the time to bring up my podcast, but...
oh, yeah, please, let us know.
I started a podcast for kids, hosted by kids, and we're going through the book Church History, because actually when this book was done, it was not done. I feel like John Donne in here, because I was kind of forced to turn it in, not physically forced, but strongly encouraged to turn it in. And I felt like, oh no, I'm not done. And I just, okay, fine, publish it. But I just felt there's so much more. And so the podcast gives me a way to continue to do that. So we did all the church fathers, well, not all, but because it's for kids, some of the major ones, and then probably we can revisit. And we're just doing the Middle Ages right now. And I'm finding out so many people now that I never knew before in the Middle Ages. Yeah. And there's one, Edmer or Idmer, I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, but it was a monk in England. And it's just amazing. I've been reading his writings, and it's just so pastoral, and they're extremely pastoral, very, very humble. During the Middle Ages, you find lots of people are extremely humble, and just so much to learn from them.
Yeah. I imagine their circumstances in life were so vastly different from the luxuries we consider rights now, not privileges. Like, these are expected as living as a person in the 21st century, whereas in the Middle Ages, the things you took for granted was far less than what we have now, and the effect that would have on your spirituality and your relationship with God and even with other people. Yeah. There's so much to learn from those people, I'm sure.
And one thing I'm trying to teach, I feel like I'm teaching my hosts, maybe not, I don't know what they think, but through, by guiding them, I provide some information about these people, and especially now in the Middle Ages, because I think we know more about the actual patristics and we definitely don't know much about the Middle Ages. It's been very difficult to find Reformed, even just Protestant scholars on the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
Roman Catholics, you find a lot, but Protestants is difficult. I try to find one that could help us to explore the mystics in a way that is well balanced.
Yes.
It was so hard. So many people said no. They said, we do any other subject. Okay. But I found somebody. So
Good.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to help our kids to understand these things. And I think if it's really exciting for me. I think I get more excited, maybe because I've been a teacher, but I get more excited when I learn something through younger people. As I teach, I learn, you know.
They must have some amazing questions.
Yeah.
Like things that we as adults don't ask or we're afraid to ask. Kids are like, what about this?
Yes, yeah. And then, you know, we were doing Augustine of Canterbury, you know how long it took me to learn to say Canterbury? I hope I'm saying it correctly, but when I wrote the book, Anselm of Canterbury, I couldn't say it, and I had to go online and just repeat it, and I said, I have to learn because I wrote the book, you know, so anyway.
This brings back a memory for me. When I started my PhD program at Durham University, I took a course on Pauline theology through the ages, something like that. And I remember the first day we were going through the syllabus, and it was with like the preeminent Paul scholar in the world. And there's about 12 of us in this seminar, and we're going through the syllabus, and you know, it's like, okay, we're of course going to study Paul's letters themselves, and then we moved to Clement of Alexandria, and then a few others. I think Irenaeus was in there, and then Martin Luther, and I was like, I waited. I was like, hold on a minute. I said, there's a gap of about
1,000 years.
Yeah, there's a big gap here. That what do we do with that? You know, are we going to look at any figures from that period, even like Thomas Aquinas, maybe, who was the only one I could think of at the time? And I remember the look on his face was kind of like, not that he'd never thought of the question, but he was like, well, that's a good question. No, let's kind of like, let's talk later about that one. You know? And I'm afraid that that's what we've done for a long time. Yeah. Is neglected a huge chunk of church history, you know, which is your expertise, that, of course, we don't have to agree with everything they believed or what they thought, but acknowledging as we said earlier about this monk you mentioned, like they lived in very different circumstances. And we know that because the Lord promised to keep his church, that from his ascension until our very conversation right now, he has called out and secured believers, Christians, through the ages. And I just remember growing up, sometimes the Dark Ages, as they were called, or the Middle Ages, were sometimes referred to as this time where there weren't very many Christians. You know, everyone was a heretic, kind of. And that's not what I was being told, but that's kind of the impression that was given. Yeah. Like, we can't listen to anyone from that time because, well, they weren't reformed.
They weren't reformed. That's why.
They weren't reformed. So that goes on. That's, you know, we stay away from that. Whereas I would hope that someone like you who is reformed and is able to go in with that balanced perspective, but especially looking at people in a way that is very accessible. Yeah. So we're not talking about like Oxford University Press level writings that most people would consider quite dry. Yeah. Great for going to sleep at night. You know, we're talking about things that are accessible and even on the scant information we might have on some of these people, we could see this, you know, red thread that goes through history that, well, the blood of Christ that connects us all ultimately.
Yeah,
So
what I was saying about teaching the kids, like I'm hoping to teach this to the kids. And for example, this Augustine of Canterbury, he was sent to England as a missionary, and just even to think about how long it took him to go from Italy to England, and then because they walked through France, and then it just took forever.
it's amazing.
Then you go talk to the king. You hope the king would say yes, and then you just wait, and it takes a very long time before the people respond. Even if the king gives permission, you still have to do a ton of catechizing because these people don't know anything. They might say yes, we can be Christian because the king is Christian, but you have to tell them what that means. And we were just talking about the patience of those people. They just went, and they just they didn't expect results immediately. We're so let's do this, and let's hope the next month we can have a church. So
Yeah, or let's do this, and okay, we'll book the flights, we'll get it going, and it's just it's almost as in if the ease of access for us today, the missionaries of old would think, okay, your heart is good, but to think that a good amount of your time, even being a missionary, is just simply the logistics of getting to that place. And then once you're there, you have, maybe that's better that it's far less easy to go back home. I'm going to have to walk across France again.
right.
Yeah, instead of just booking a flight.
Yeah.
And maybe that kept you in there, like a Hudson Taylor type attitude. Maybe you don't want to go on that ship journey back across the ocean.
Yeah, and that was a fun episode about Augustine of Canterbury, because actually we found that he was afraid to go. And he got halfway there, and he was about to turn back because of the things he heard about the English being so barbaric. So he was ready to turn back, and then he decided, the Pope convinced him to keep going. But I know the kids were really impressed about that, that he was afraid. That they didn't think about missionaries being afraid. But I'm sure even today, some missionaries are afraid, but we don't usually advertise those parts of their lives. So.
Yeah, or it's a fear, it's a different fear, right?
Maybe
the fear is of something different than what they feared. He feared being probably tortured and killed. Whereas today it's a fear of rejection or lack of resources or other things like that. So what else have you been covering on the podcast?
We're almost done with the Middle Ages, so we covered a lot. It's been very interesting. I teach the kids not to come up with their own assumptions too much. We've been going back and forth on how to do, because they have an initial part where they just discuss things among themselves. And initially, I just let them go free. Then we had somebody who was a bit too fire and brimstone, so we had to kind of tune it down. So I said, okay, let's have a script, but they wrote the script. So anyway, we're kind of going back and forth. But then after the initial part, they talk to the scholars. And so I try to tell them in the beginning, just don't say much. Say what you've read, even in my book or wherever. I learned this, I heard this, and the reactions. Very short. And then ask questions. But ask questions. Don't bring your own ideas, because we are learning. So that's the point of my podcast. They're kids, they're learning. We want to hear from the experts. And then maybe when the experts say something that sounds strange, unusual, or whatever, they can react. But
that sounds very healthy. How old are these kids that you're talking to?
The youngest is 11. The oldest is 17.
Okay. And how many?
We have 9 now, but they take turns.
Okay.
Because they're in school. So,
Sure.
they're busy.
I can see that being, when I said healthy, I mean the ability for children, especially at that age, they're coming into that point where their brains are starting to be able to think critically about things, and use logic and reason, and ultimately ask really good questions.
Yes.
And so the fact that you said you're going through this book. Yeah. So the fact that you're going through your book and teaching them how to think critically about these things is, I imagine, really, really helpful for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And last night I was talking at the church, and I kind of said the same things, and how important it is to learn when you study the past, to go in humbly. Like the past is a foreign country, they say. So you go in humbly. You don't want to be the ugly American. You go in.
Or Italian.
Or Italian, and it's true. I'm the ugly Italian here. If I go to an Italian restaurant, you don't want me in an Italian restaurant unless it's really good. So anyway, you don't go in as an ugly foreigner and try to impose your views or see the past through your glasses, through your views. You want to learn. You want to just absorb and understand and say, oh, they're doing the things differently here, and let's see, can we learn from them? And so I was telling the parents last night, it's good to teach kids to ask the right questions, like you were saying. And then one parent said, what are the right questions? So I pretty much said the same thing, but I know it came to me, one good question to ask is always why. Because sometimes we see people, in the early church, they went. Some people just left everything behind, went to deserts, or one guy sat on top of a pillar for many, many years. And to us, it just sounds so weird. And but instead of just saying, they're weird, finish, you ask why. And in this podcast, we've been asking the experts why, and there are reasons, that then you go and you say, the people who used to go to deserts and all that, there was, I think I have a quote in my book from a father complaining, these young people, they have everything. Why do they leave everything and go out in the desert? I don't know the actual quote. It's I could find it if you want. But it's like what people said about the hippies a while ago, right? So they had reasons for doing that. The society was becoming very materialistic, and being a Christian just had lost its meaning because everybody was becoming a Christian because it was a legal religion. So there were different reasons. If you read Basil of Caesarea, his letter when he explains why he went off to desert areas, you really understand. And then the amazing thing, that's why you really have to read the people and talk to the people. No, you can't talk. Listen to the people. Because he said he went everywhere looking for solitary places. And he said, I took my troubles with me.
Oh.
And then he says, you have to find the peace and quietness in yourself, within yourself. And then, he goes on and explains how, and you can see, you can understand what they were going through, what they were trying to achieve, and then they don't sound so weird anymore. And when he describes the letter, is the second letter, if you go to letters it's online, it's for free, he describes, says, you're married, you have these worries, you're not married, you worry about getting married, you have a house, you have these worries, and and you could be talking about that today. So it's if you're asking why, you can ask experts and they can help you, or you can just read the appropriate texts
Yeah.
by the people,
Yeah.
and you let them talk to you, and then you see, oh, they're not too different from us. They came to conclusions that were maybe a little bit different, but not completely.
Yeah.
So, and then how would we react? Well, are there solutions, something that would help us today, or maybe partially? Just reason with all these things, Like I think they had a lot to say. Those early ascetics, they went off, and some went overboard. I think personally, I wouldn't sit on a pillar for the rest of my life. But, but some. I think Basil, Macarena, they figured things out, and the same with the mystics, and we just did an episode about the superstitions in the Catholic Church during the Middle Ages. We added only one because I wanted to emphasize how the Middle Ages were not a time just of pure superstition,
Right,
but there was
right.
that too. So we had one episode about that, and then some people in France actually prayed to a dead dog. They thought that the dog will help their children.
Huh.
And one of my hosts said, why? So I said, okay, we asked the expert. So she said, why did they pray to a dead dog instead of going directly to Christ? And so the expert had a very good good answer. But I love it. The experts we find are not people who just say, oh, well, because they were superstitious and medieval. But he explained how in the Middle Ages, Christ and God were seen both as far away, detached from the world. Even if Christ became man, he was always represented. Even in images, you see Christ always standing with his hands like that and emotionless and everything. So you get that idea, Christ is far and God is far. So that's why Mary can help you more, and the saints, and then why not the dog? In that case, the dog, it was a story where a dog saved a child, but then his owners killed him because they thought he was the culprit. Anyway, then people started to pray to a dog. I mean, if you lose the connection with Christ and you start putting a lot of intermediaries, then there's pretty much no end. You could pray to a dog.
Especially if it was a nice dog.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a golden retriever or something.
I think it was a greyhound.
Really?
From what I read, yeah.
So I can see that makes sense to me, is that the church would push so strongly in one direction in a good way. Christ is not like us.
Yes.
I mean, he is and he isn't. So they focus too much on the exalted Christ seated on the throne, that type of biblical imagery that we get, especially in Revelation.
Yes.
And of course, throughout the New Testament. But so you've provided the reason why people would, especially popular religion, would pray to a dead dog, or things like Mariology or praying to the saints.
Yeah.
They were closer in a way. They were more human.
Yeah.
We're so removed from that.
Yeah.
We just have no idea.
Right. and
not to say that it was right.
Yeah, no.
But
to try to understand.
And I think what's still encouraging about those people, and including the ones that you've written books on, is that their intent was to honor the Lord
Yes.
who had saved them, who had rescued them from whatever their circumstances in life were that were probably not changing much. You know, there was no prosperity gospel back there for a reason.
Yes.
But it changes the narrative about there being this malicious intent to like corrupt people by turning them intentionally away from Christ. It was what would we call it? Like an honest mistake.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, there was some of that, of course. Even Michelangelo, he complained a lot about the church. Lots of people were complaining about the corruption of the church. So it was obvious. Everybody knew the church was corrupted, but mostly in the higher levels. So there was some probably intentional corruption, but other things, it's always good to wonder why and let people speak for themselves.
Yeah. I think coming back to the point you had made about people being, like the past being a foreign country, it makes, or it brings to my mind at least, the importance of things like catechisms. So last week we had the three authors of Glorifying God and I always forget the name.
Is it Enjoying Him?
Yeah, Glorifying God and Enjoying Him Forever. Sorry, guys. They did a devotional on the Westminster Shorter Catechism, but we talked a lot about the history of catechisms, which didn't just start at the Reformation, but how it boils it down to these principles that are still written within the culture and the time that they were composed. Like they're influenced by that, and yet they are striving for something that is base principles that Christians of any age. I mean, that's the reason why churches even today hold to the Westminster Confession or standards or Heidelberg or Luther. So it seems like that's a way that the church can bridge that gap. And it would be interesting to I didn't ask the guys this question, but maybe you as a church historian, but what is the life expectancy of a catechism? At what point do you think, okay, I think this needs to be revised. Things have changed. The scripture hasn't changed. God hasn't changed. But maybe the way that we understand things or even certain words and terms that are, the meaning has changed. That would be interesting study. Westminster hasn't been changed since it was written, has it? Like it hasn't gone through periods of revision?
I don't think so, but I'm not an expert on this. I know I heard that there were some questions about maybe one question in the catechism.
Really? I haven't heard that. Okay.
There was more referring to a political power.
Sure. Or like the 39 Articles or the London Baptist Confession. There may be things, I'm not saying there are, but there may be things where we could say, okay, that might need to be revised a bit, yet is always in accordance with the scriptures.
Yeah.
Like how we had the, on inerrancy, the Chicago Statement on Inerrancy. Yeah. So things like that are addressing current issues. Now that's not a catechism, but it's, again, one of these statements that addresses things that are now presently affecting us.
To make it clear.
Yeah. Let's take a short break so we can clean that card. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, we're back from a short break. Thanks, Simonetta.
Thank you.
Well, let me get to kind of like the crowning question for you as a church historian is, and I'm sure you answer this all the time, but why does church history, why does it even matter? And I'll preface that, I'll add to that question this fact that during the break, you and I were chatting a bit about how you had said something to the effect of you were questioned recently about, or challenged about church history from the standpoint of, well, maybe we shouldn't tell kids the bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just tell them the positive things that happened, because otherwise, well, that they might gain a negative view of the church, or they might leave.
They might not be ready for.
Or worst case, they might leave the faith.
Mm-hmm.
It might open up a Pandora's box that leads them down a rejection of the faith at worst case.
Yeah.
But I would assume you don't think that we should hide the bad stuff necessarily.
No, I put bad stuff in my books.
What's the purpose of? So then I'll revise the question. Why is it important, or why does church history matter, and why should we learn the whole of it?
Okay.
Not just the highlights.
That's a good question, yeah. So why it matters, there's lots of answers. The first one, of course, is because Christ is preserving the church, and this is what I did in my book. I try to find a thread that keeps the story together in my book, and so from the first page I talk about Jesus giving the promise, I will preserve my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Then at the end I bring it up again, because after reading the whole book, you see that he has preserved the church. We're still here, So, and I think personally, seeing all the bad things that happen can actually strengthen your faith in that, because you see, if the church had been all glorious throughout, it would have been good, but it's like us in our lives. We're sinners, and when we realize that Christ is still preserving us, he has promised to preserve each one of us, in spite of the way we live and the way we betray him every day.
Yeah.
It makes us so much more grateful. And so it's the same. And you see the church attacked from the outside with persecution, from the inside with heresies and everything, and with stupidity, with ways that people misunderstood scriptures and twisted them for their own interest, or just to favor their own personal non-biblical doctrines.
Yeah.
And in spite of all that, the church keeps going, and the gospel. And that's the thing, another thread through my book is the gospel. I try to always bring up the gospel as much as I can. He has preserved not only his church, but the gospel. So that to me is amazing, and it really should make us grateful. So that's one reason to study church history. Number two, I would say, because the past is a foreign country, to learn about differences and to learn to accept these differences, and that helps you to be humble, stay humble, and to accept other people, learn from other people. And then it's a good habit, because then you can do it today too. Instead of going on social media and biting everybody that says something slightly different than you, you have learned from church history to accept people that, they are Christian, but they just have slightly different opinions. And you learn from that. So that's one thing. And then it helps you to know what you believe and why, and that helps you to strengthen your own convictions, and also in apologetics when you talk to people, because I get things like that all the time. I teach Italian, and once I was trying to have a more kind of a different class. I did art history. I taught an Italian class on art history in Italy. So initially, of course, I guess throughout the Middle Ages too, lots of the art was Christian.
Yes.
And so somebody came up, I don't remember why, but they said, I think I was explaining how Jesus was represented in art. And they said, oh, well, but Jesus only, they started to say that Jesus was God only at the Council of Nicaea. I don't even think they knew the word Nicaea, but at the council, and it was Emperor Constantine that said that. That's completely wrong, right? but those things go around, and if people, even our kids, they hear that, they might hear it from a professor, from somebody who's teaching a completely different subject and knows nothing about history, and then they give credibility to that, or they might hear, oh, look at those Christians, the Crusades and slavery and the way they wrote about women, and it's all awful, and then but you learn church history, and you can say, like the subject of slavery, yes, there were Christians that promoted slavery. They even thought that some races were inferior to others because they misinterpreted a part of the Bible, and that was really bad. Obviously, in my book, I even used the word evil, which I don't usually do, but in that case, I did. But the Christians were the first to bring up that it was wrong and to fight against it, starting with Gregory of Nyssa, who was like a lone voice in the 4th century against slavery. It's very rare. But then, of course, in the 18th century, and when slavery was banned in England, the Muslims were still promoting, were still doing it, and they hadn't gotten to that point yet. So it was Christians that realized it was wrong. And to me, to see that Christianity makes horrible mistakes, but recovers, learns, repents. And you see, I have a chapter on South Africa, and it's so moving to me to see how the church repented. And you can be cynical and say not everybody repented. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But the church as a whole repented. And to me, that is so great, so strengthening of somebody's faith, and you can talk to people. And I think if our kids are honest about history and not afraid, we don't have anything to hide, we don't have anything to fear, we are all sinners. They were sinners, we are sinners. The people criticizing us are sinners. And we're all in it together. And we're learning. The church has been learning. We have a lot more to learn. We're still, and this gives us hope, that we will continue to learn.
Yeah.
And I think we can even have something to offer to society, because the way we have been able to criticize ourselves, our own history, our own tradition.
Yeah.
And instead of just canceling people out, just work with it and realize, what sin can do, and how do we prevent it from happening again. So,
what a perspective. Yeah, you're making me think a lot about things. I just hadn't thought much about this connection between the individual believer and the global, well, let's say it probably the Catholic, like lower C Catholic Church, in the sense that we can look through history, the last 2,000 years of history, and see empires and kingdoms that have come and gone, flourished and been destroyed, and the church remains, even in its various branches and strands. And it's as you say, it's a testament to the Lord's fidelity to his word, that he would preserve and keep his church, and us.
yes.
I mean, I think about my own life and the things the sins I commit willingly or unwillingly. And for all of us as Christians, there's those moments of doubt where we're like, will the Lord he'll forgive that. You know, I keep falling into the same sin, or this thing I did, even unintentionally, was so bad. How can I, you know, we all struggle with that. And yet I've never thought about it from the sense of, well, look to what he's done with the entire church throughout its history. He's been faithful to it, you know, and you are part of that church. Amazing. And but also the thought that we as a church can be this witness, and not simply as those who stand on rooftops shouting the gospel or throwing Bibles at people in the worst sense of it, but as examples of imperfection and forgiveness. Forgiveness in the midst of imperfection, I think, is the way to say it. Rather than what has been attempted, I think, many times throughout church history, which is to be the moral authority, and to be well, yes, we are the city on the hill, but we're not the city. We're not the city of Zion. Like that awaits. So we're kind of this, like, you know, dirty Midtown Manhattan on a hill. You know, we got a lot of problems, but the Lord is still keeping us functioning and thriving at certain points, while some buildings crumble. Anyway, I could go on and on about that, but that's really, I think, quite profound what you've said just now, linking the Lord's work in the Catholic or global universal church, and we as individual believers within it. And
because God's promises for us too, you know, like has promised to preserve each one of us, and He has promised to preserve the church, and He's doing it, and He's forgiving us, forgiving us as a church and us as individuals, and I don't know why, but He does.
Because He promised to. He said He would, right? And we hold fast to those. I imagine that for you, the experience of writing this book on church history was, well, I'll ask you the question. Was it an exercise in being taught yourself about this exact thing we're talking about?
Yes. I actually, the more problems I saw, the more I got encouraged. It was like the opposite. That's why I want to encourage families to just be honest with their kids and face these things, but then also show how the church recovered from things, and how they thought about problems and reworked them in their minds, and because that's what we have to do all the time, even now. Not be satisfied and be humble.
I'm thinking of my own kids right now who are in the public school system. And that's by choice, by the way. Don't criticize me too much on social media. But that I want them to know, I want them to hear about the horrible things that happened, for example, in the Crusades, from me first. Or from your book first, through a trusted resource, rather than, oh, Dad, my teacher at school said this, and it's starting to crumble away, that that kind of pillar of faith that we've helped encourage build within them. But rather, as Christians, how amazing if we can, or if my kids can just be honest at school about it too, like, we acknowledge that. And it points to the faithfulness of Christ to His church. I think for an unbeliever, it's like, I don't understand. Like, what do you mean? That's a paradox that maybe can't be reconciled in their mind. But I think for our kids, if they can hold fast to that, how powerful, especially at a young age, you'll carry that with you the rest of your life.
By the way, we have an amazing episode on the Crusades on the podcast. You should listen to. It's coming up. It's kind of unusual because the person that was supposed to come, he's a top expert on the Crusades, but he's an elderly gentleman who couldn't figure out Zoom. We tried very hard, and he couldn't. He said this computer just shut off, and it wouldn't respond. So we had to do something unusual where he wrote the answers. And then one of our hosts that has a deeper voice because it's past that time in adolescence, he's answering his questions. So we said, forget that this is Lucas, pretend that this is, Mr. Andrea. And so these are amazing. It's an amazing episode because it's really well balanced.
Mm-hmm.
So not everything was wrong with the Crusades. We have to be careful.
Right.
Like wars are always bad. It's like, okay, wars are bad, but it's not that the Christians were invading.
Kind of how it's typically portrayed.
Right, yeah.
Like these rapacious Christians wanting to go and slaughter those who were different from them just out of hatred.
So you have to listen because there were tons of different motivations, different approaches.
Even for probably those in the decision-making, power level,